Okay, I call to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is Tuesday, November 5th, 2019, and the time is 5:04 p.m. I'll have a roll call starting from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz.
Allison Beckham.
Patty Beckman. 4 board members are present. Board member Perleberg will be joining us shortly, but we do have a quorum. All rise. Vice President Beckham, will you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I move to approve the agenda without the following items. Consent agenda item 5A, personal actions. Please remove Marjan Scales as this is an error. And consent agenda item 5C, revisions to the middle school and high school planning guides for 2020-2021 school year as further discussions are needed. Do any other board members have changes to the agenda? No? Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Board member Beckham seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Moving now to our information and discussion items. Dr. Creekard.
Thank you, President Beckham, members of the board. In our third report of the excess capacities, that tonight we're bringing you the similar reports as we had from Arcadia, Coronado, Saguaro complexes, and now we have the Desert Mountain Chaparral learning communities. And with that, I would introduce the 2 assistant superintendents for school operations, Dr. Hagegat and Dr. Sakos.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board, Dr. Creekard and Sandra. Today, Dr. Sakos and I have the opportunity to share the excess capacity for Chaparral and Desert Mountain. And I will need the presentation up. Okay, so since I don't have my clicker, well, I'll do it from up here. So today we have for you the same information that you received in the past as to why it is.
Is the mic on?
Let's see if it works. So we have the same information that we brought to you from the previous presentations, which includes why it is that we need to calculate capacity, and I'll give you a second there to go over it. And it's important for us to know that we need to estimate the capacity so that we can determine open enrollment for the following year. This gives you the criteria as to what it is that was utilized, and in the case of a couple of our schools, you will note from your background information that although 750 was the number that was used, Dr. Sakos will share a little bit more with you as we continue the presentation as to what the variation was for at least one of our schools. And it gives you what are some of the areas that were taken away as we considered capacity, which again, as an example, your ELL instruction rooms and special education classes have a different capacity than your regular standard staffing. There is the criteria specific to our grade levels, also a review from last time. Now we get into the actual capacity per school. Starting with Cherokee, we want to note that we're using the numbers for the rebuild. So we have 817 program capacity. We then take our enrollment S of 96, and then we have program excess capacity of 54. When we look at Cochise, you notice that we have excess program capacity of 91, Sequoia 182, and when you look at the Copper Ridge, we do see a larger number there, and we know that we have a lot of capacity there, but that's not news to any of us here as we continue to build enrollment. Cocopah, we call it limited capacity, and Chaparral is still able to take at least 307 students.
I have a note to Chaparral High School. If you looked in your background information, there are 12 classes in the A building, which is the building that right above the library. That was one building that was not reconfigured or rebuilt during our high school rebuild. And there are classrooms in there that are 730 square feet to 733, 735. So what I did with that, if I were to exclude those rooms altogether, we would have lowered the capacity of program capacity of where we are now, even though we still have rooms. So what I did is I utilized a reduced number at 25 to allow for that. Those classes is primarily the world language classes that are now upstairs. And as Dr. Creekard shared with me, historically, that was the English wing, and at a time where the classrooms were capped English classes were capped at 25. So those are just smaller classrooms in general.
So are those classes, are the world language classes there, am I hearing you correctly? Are they capped at 25?
No.
Because of the size of the classes, or they're larger than that? They're 30?
They range. Some of
Right.
them may be upwards of 30. The students do fit in those classes. I just utilize 25 to adjust for our formula.
Well, then I guess, are we at the question portion of our presentation? Because I wonder, should we be reducing the size of those classes or moving those classes into one of the other buildings and swapping out a class that has typically a smaller class size and putting them in the A building?
So the principal do have flexibility of moving departments and moving spaces. He believes that area suits the world language department just fine.
I mean, yeah, they may not be happy with what I just said.
Yeah, and I think that they've made that work. It's just, and at the high school level, there's not a lot of extra furniture like we would at elementary with centers and such, so they're able to make it work.
And previously, before the rebuild of Chaparral, the World Language Department was split. Some of it was upstairs, the old classroom building, and others were on the first floor of that building where the library was. So they're happy to be in one place. It is a really nice setup, but it tells you that there was a time in the late 80s or 90s when the district was flush enough that they could cap English classes at 25 and then require more writing in those classes as a result. That was kind of a trade-off. We're going to emphasize more writing. Teachers are going to ask for more writing for students. So to give them time to correct those essays and so forth, they capped the classes at 25. Really a nice thing to do. I would certainly hope someday down the road we're able to do something like that.
And then the last thing I'll add about Chaparral, while they could welcome 307 more students, that would come with some additional parking challenges. So that campus now only has seniors that they are able to accommodate parking passes for at this time.
And if I'm not mistaken, and Dr. Creekard, you would know better than I, historically, parking spaces were given, or typically given, just to seniors, and if there were excess, if it was a smaller senior class, then they would then offer some to juniors. Is that correct?
I think that was the case during my time as principal at Chaparral, we were under 2,000 students
Yeah.
most of that time, 1,800, 1,900, and so most juniors got parking spaces, but that was just a number of kids. Now we're over 2,000, 2,100, 2,200. It's primarily seniors.
So it's not a given or an expectation for juniors to have parking spaces?
Right. I think I'll take a little bit of a risk here. Our transportation department, by law and guidelines of law, defines for high school what is a safe walking area. And they review things such as major roads that have to be crossed, or canals, or so forth. And they decide on the bus routes accordingly. But there is a walking area where students can safely walk. So students walk if they live in that area. They can ride the bus if they are outside that area, or if they are open enrolled, they've already signed off saying that they understand that they would provide their own transportation. So parking, unfortunately, for the convenience for kids who go to work and have various things to do is not something that we have built schools for, because we have provided busing to neighborhoods in the past.
And so that is true, that does apply for Chaparral right now, where it's only your seniors, and should there be extra, then they go to a junior lottery. That is the same, and jumping to the next capacity, I'll talk about Desert Mountain for a moment. When I was up at Desert Mountain 14, 15 years ago, we were closer to that 2,400 mark that you see there of capacity. Seniors had first dibs, if you will, at parking, and then we were able to lottery off some junior parking. And so now they're at a place right now at Desert Mountain High School where they've redone some of the parking lots, and so there's more spaces, and right now they don't have a parking problem. So they have to follow the criteria of the licensure and all of those things. So. Go into Desert Mountain here, so you can see the program capacity at 2329. The enrollment as of September 6th is 2,062, and they can welcome 267 more students. Moving up to Mountainside, you can see that they have plenty of capacity to welcome more students, and we're very optimistic about the MYP program and attracting back many of our students. And I know Mr. Conan is here tonight, and that is one of his primary goals. Same with Desert Canyon Middle School. We have plenty of room Desert Canyon Middle, plenty of room to welcome some additional students there. And with the Mandarin at Desert Canyon Elementary, we're really working hard to market and attract the program, especially as our current second graders begin to move up into the middle school program in just a short two and a half years. K-8. Cheyenne K-8, you can see that they have limited room here. That is primarily in the elementary. If you looked at some of the background information, that's primarily at 1 and 2 grade levels at the elementary level. Their middle school is about right at capacity. And with that, I'll let Dr. Hagegot talk about her top half of the schools.
Yes, and so you look at Bradfield, Laguna, Desert Canyon, Anasazi, we have capacity there to welcome many of the families, and we are, as Dr. Sacco shared, there's programs at each one of these schools that we feel are going to attract that enrollment, and we're starting to see that. And so we then draw conclusions that there is capacity, excess capacity in each one of the areas, and that our superintendent may estimate it if it's necessary to change that so that we can have space for those living in the boundaries. So we have for the Chaparral Learning Community, we have again excess capacity. Each school will address it on a case-by-case and on grade level and the program. And in cases such as Cocopah, grade levels are at a limited capacity, as you saw with our numbers. For the Desert Mountain, we have a similar situation, and in this case, we only have Cheyenne that is at a limited capacity. And then we say thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? No? Okay, I want to thank you. Board Member Kravitz.
Again, we've seen this presentation, it was sent to us earlier, so for not asking questions, it's not because we're disinterested, it's because we've asked our questions previously. For instance, I asked about parking. So.
I know you spent considerable time with our principals and going room by room at every school and learning complex or community. Thank you. I know it was an interesting process, but really important as we all understand the programs and how each of these schools are run and the rooms are actually used for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our principals for being here tonight and for helping us with this.
So the next,
Oh, I just-
the next step is that on the second meeting in November, we will bring our recommendations as to open or closed to open enrollment, to begin that open enrollment policy, which we're going to be discussing later. But that's the next step. This is all the preparation for that, to give you that background information, so that those decisions or those recommendations have come to you with some background.
Board Member
I just want to make one point. I know this presentation isn't about parking, and it's about our high schools and our capacity, but because this has come up recently, we've gotten some emails about it. Do the number of parking spaces we have at each of our schools, does anybody know, does it match what the city has said, or the fire department has said, or whomever is in charge of those things, has said we are allowed to have? Do we have less than, more than, equal to? Are we where we should be?
Somebody else asked that question before, maybe it was you, but
No, it wasn't.
somebody asked that before, so I asked Mr. Rayler about that. He said he knows of no city regulation about number of spots for schools or businesses. Handicap, yes,
Okay,
but not general.
okay.
So, as Dr. Sacco said, they reconfigured the parking lot at Desert Mountain High School, and that created more spots. That is part of the plan at Arcadia,
Right, I
and
know we've done
we'll
that
be
for
looking
Arcadia.
at Chaparral the same way.
They just did Chaparral this past summer, so they were
Okay.
able to capture about 60 more spots. So that's been done already.
And as a reminder, we do offer bus service to those
Yes.
students and families that choose to
Yes.
avail themselves of that.
And generally speaking, our high school bus routes are the least
Right.
full, so plenty of room.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We move now to our consent agenda, and I move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Now moving on to our action items. 6A, the approval of the selection criteria for the new superintendent, and that is, Dr. Pickard, did you have anything to say about this?
I hope you find somebody better.
Ms. Marshall?
How can I top that?
I'm not going to comment.
Do you need
Is
something?
that for the one that's on your desk email?
Yeah, I just,
Would you mind opening it? It's for the board members and anybody who's tuning in. These are the criteria that the search firm put together based on the discussion you all had with our consultant, Dr. Joel, and some additional follow-up you had individually.
Okay, do I have any questions or comments from board members?
Do you want to go first?
Well, go ahead.
Board Member Beckham?
I would say I'm really looking forward to hearing our new board members, since this is quite similar to what we had in the past. I think 3 of them almost are identical in a way. 2 new ones, or actually, we reduced it by 1, so one that was a little different, which would have been number 4. Then understanding of the importance of creating an exceptional educational experience that enables the district to attract and retain students, parents, and staff. That's really the new one that was kind of added. And we took off experience with unified K-12 district of similar enrollment size and diverse competitive choice environment with 200 million or greater bond experience. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your input.
Board Member Greenberg?
yeah, so I do think that there are differences between what was done in the past. I want to keep in mind that Dr. Joel asked us not to focus too much on the wording and phrasing and made some comments to that. So, you know, based on the research I've done, and I've never been on a search committee and carried one of these out, I would say that in general, it might come across to me as a little wordy and I don't want to, I'm not here to edit or make suggestions to the editing. I'm just saying, you know, I'm not sure that it's as targeted as I would have liked. The data-driven decision-making, I think that was one that was on there before. And data-driven decision-making is, of course, important, but I would probably go back to the point that most people make decisions looking at a number of things, including data. So it's kind of, I guess for me, it's an interesting one to emphasize the data aspect of that, because I know certainly we have been presented and companies and governing boards and all sorts of organizations have been presented ideas without data to back it up. But at the same time, I think our district does a pretty good job of putting in a lot of data, maybe after pushing for that for some time. I just think that data is one aspect of the decision-making process. So I think it's interesting that how it's been emphasized. But yeah, I mean, perhaps not as precise as I would have wanted, but again, Dr. Joel said that wasn't his focus on this, and so that's fine with me if he has taken that position and that's how they operate.
For the record, Board Member Perleberg has joined us. Thank you.
Do you want me?
Board Member Beckman.
I might give some insight into why the data-driven decision was so important. And I know you just walked in, but you might even have a better background. Sure. But when I came on the board, the goal was to be able to look at data. And I guess in the past, and you alluded to that, it hadn't been. And it appeared that there was maybe some reluctance to do so, or the initiative to enforcing that it was happening. And so I think that that's where the emphasis came from. Since now we do have data, we don't want that to get lost, because we have a superintendent who isn't used to using it, because there still are a lot of districts that I guess are not using it. And so I think that is the emphasis there, is the fear that if we did hire somebody who just said, yeah, we use data, but we didn't have the evidence of the type of data and how they're using it and how they're using it to drive instruction, that it might set this district back on that goal. Is that fair to say to my two board members that were here?
Board Member Beckman.
The other thing is, I'm going to add one thing to the, I think this is the opportunity. I don't think we need to, we don't have to just accept this. This is from the governing board. So if there are some items that you would like to suggest, I think it is the opportune time to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate those two things. I would say that on the data point, I completely take that. I think it is, as I'm sure as it was to you, very concerning that data was not being used. I think that's the mark of, I can't even fathom how people could make decisions without data. So if that was the case, that is unfortunate. I'm glad that isn't necessarily the case now, as I don't think it is. I mean, to be clear, I think it's not that I want to add anything. It's not that these are necessarily wrong. From what I read in the research I did, this is actually quite an important aspect of this, because this is what you're basing, your questions when you're, kind of sifting through applications and going through and kind of saying, well, obviously, as we said, we want somebody who's honest and who's business-minded and has all these, right? We want all those traits. But what are kind of the 4 key things that we want to hone in on to kind of sift out those applicants at first? And so everything that I had read was saying, you want to choose 3 or 4 things as we have that are really key to the success in the long term. And keep it short and to the point, because that helps you, that would help them, in theory, focus their questions about what they want to ask or kind of think about when they're going through the applications before they present them to us. And so the reason I'm saying I don't necessarily want to kind of wordsmith this, as Dr. Joel has asked us not to do, is because it seems to me that in Dr. Joel's mind and in their process, this is useful for them to get to that point. For me, it probably would not be useful but for them, if it is useful for them and this is how they do it, that's fine for me. Is that a fair, that's that a fair way of saying it? Okay.
Understand. No, I was just going to emphasize, what Board Member Beckham has said. I think it's been these last few years, building a culture that use data to not only drive instruction, but also improve instruction. And I would very much agree to hate to see that go backwards, lose that emphasis, because it is such a new culture, really, in SUSD. If you go back, 6-10 years ago, we lost it, and so it does need emphasized.
And I would agree. I mean, he did specifically say to keep this a little bit more broad, as you pointed out, and I had an appreciation for that. And I know you should be using data, like Board Member Greenberg said, for almost every decision, but, interpreting this, which we probably shouldn't drill down too much on the data one, we could go here all day, but to me, that would be, using the data point would be always, like you said, that should be something that's implied. However, but you can extrapolate that and say that we use data for both a beginning point and an end point, meaning when I look for a superintendent, I don't want to hear that he put in a new math curriculum, or she, whomever, a new math curriculum. I want to hear we put in a new, or we put, the district brought forth a new math curriculum because we started at 20% proficiency, and because we did that, we ended at this, So I agree that it's certainly important, but I do appreciate that he wanted us to keep it, to cast the wide net, as you said. Any other? Board Member Kravitz?
I read the second one, which said a record of accountability to all stakeholders of the schools and community, and I don't have a problem with that. I just preferred the fourth bullet point where we had previously done this, where it was committed to a culture of accountability with the highest ethical standards and integrity, because to me, that encompasses everyone and not just the superintendent, whereas the one that Dr. Joel drafted makes it seem like it's just the superintendent who is accountable, but it's everybody in the district, staff, his team. So I think the previous version of this is more specific.
So you like this version?
No, I like the previous version, which was committed to a culture of accountability with the highest ethical standards and integrity. Because to me, that's the whole culture. It's not, the way I read this, what Dr. Joel wrote, it's just the superintendent who's accountable. But, and I just feel like everybody is accountable, should be held to some account.
And I'm wondering if that came from my emphasis of wanting to make sure that that superintendent was a person who reinforced what I'm, personal accountability, but I agree with you, culture of accountability too.
The whole culture, yeah.
So I read it more broadly, the second one, but I can completely see your point of adding, it is a culture of accountability, not just him.
Yeah.
But I think that stems from leadership, so I think that's why I was really honing in on that being important.
Board Member Greenberg?
Yeah, and I guess since we were making comments that can be reviewed by Dr. Joel, I think I would agree with both of those things, and I think that the way it's emphasized, if the superintendent or whoever we hire has a record of accountability and is able to demonstrate, we had a great thing going, but then we had an issue somewhere and we had to fix it either by hiring new staff, letting staff go, implementing a new curriculum, getting rid of a curriculum, whatever that is. I think those types of examples of, I think that is your record, and so that record also branches out to the culture because it's a top-down thing. There is no accountability unless the top is accountable and then the second, the layers. Yeah, so I think the emphasis, I don't think the emphasis changes the fact, even though it doesn't say specifically culture of accountability, I think we are talking about what this person brings to the table in that arena, and that should hopefully go to developing a culture generally.
Any further comments? Questions? Okay.
Well, I think there's a follow-up to that, because I think Board Member Kravitz was kind of implying maybe she'd like number 4.
I would like number 4 to
And
read the way.
And so I want to be able to respond as a board. So in mine, when I responded the first time is the reason I think that was there, listening to Jan. I don't have a problem keeping it the way it is, because I want to be able to have that conversation around what is your record, what demonstrate how you had the accountability, and in that we could add in the interview question and how has that related or set up to have a culture of accountability in your schools. So I think that culture is a very important piece that you bring up, but maybe that could be the second step in that conversation that you have with him or her after they talk about their understanding of accountability and how they have demonstrated it in the past. So I don't need to change that as long as it's kind of understood that, and we give Dr. Joel the understanding that it stems at the top, but we're also looking to make sure that the culture's there.
I guess I want to be more specific, because when we've gone through this process before, there was a disconnect between sometimes what we thought and what they thought. And so this way, this leaves no question about what the intent is, or what it is that we're looking for.
We can change it if we really want to. I think the mere fact that we're having this conversation on camera and it is available for and Dr. Kriegard can communicate this to Dr. Joel, because it seems like we're all 5 of us are on board with the culture of accountability. That Dr. Joel can review this, their team can review this open meeting. They have these notes and know for a fact that the whole point is a strong leader who can hold people accountable, who is him or herself accountable, and can develop that culture of accountability. I think that is sufficient. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I just have one question, and maybe I'm not understanding exactly where you're going. How would you define that? If someone was to respond to you accurately and say they did have a culture of, how would they answer you? Like, exactly what would prove to you, and I'm just saying this honestly because I'm trying to get it, that they had a culture of accountability in their school district. Because when I look at this, I would think, and I'm not arguing for one or the other, I'm opening up a dialogue here, that a record of accountability for all stakeholders of the schools and community would drive a culture of accountability.
Right.
So,
Well, but we've had groups in this district, again, I'm being honest, where there's something called the lemon dance. And I've heard this from people in education, where maybe somebody isn't doing a great job in a particular position and they get moved around and they're no longer somebody's problem anymore until they leave. And so that to me is not a culture of accountability.
So, but to say there's a culture, that would imply that it's systemic, that everyone, that someone
It's
could
not
cite.
everybody, but
Well,
somebody
all-
has to take responsibility for, is this person doing their job? If they're not, what are we going to do to help them do their job better? And then after we've tried to help them do their job better, and either they are or they're not.
But I'm just
And
trying
what
to
do we- yeah.
differentiate between the culture and a record. Because to
Oh.
me, a culture would imply that everyone, all the leadership in the district, that this is just what
Oh,
is
okay.
going on.
I see what you're
There are
saying
many
between record or
people
culture.
that consistently don't do what you just called.
To me, a record is just is more of just, this is what I,
Right.
and this is how I was accountable, versus a culture meaning it was systemic. It was
Right.
throughout the whole
Okay.
district.
So if someone was to answer that correctly, and this is where I want us all to be on the same page, so that when we give him these parameters, we all understood
Right.
them in the same way. If someone was to answer that in a manner that was accurate for the way you posed the question, it would be that this person and this person, they could cite many examples in the organization of where they held people accountable. So not just the superintendent coming forward and saying, this person wasn't a good fit here, and we had tasked them with this, and so we had to move them to this department. And also at another time, we had leadership over at this site that did the same thing, recognized that this needed to be changed, that maybe they made a decision that wasn't the right one, took accountability for it, and made the change. So that's how they would answer that, maybe in a positive way that would define what you're asking, and with the other question. Is that, am I understanding that right? Versus someone that was just the superintendent, that was the head of the district, who said continually, if I had to hold someone accountable, or, you know, myself, I did that, and gave you certain examples. So is that the difference, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, Board Member Greenberg?
I think with these, I mean, again, these points are kind of what we want from, you know, the key issues that we think we need in order to be successful for the next 4 or 5 years. And it's possible, as Dr. Joel said, based on everything I read, that, you know, we will certainly have candidates that meet some of these criteria, don't meet others. And typically what happens in that type of situation, especially if you really like the candidate who has gaps, is you would either get additional coaching for them, or you would look to another staff member or somebody you could bring on as well that shores up that deficiency. If you have someone who's excellent with data, excellent on academic focus, you know, strong strategic thinking, but not a good communicator, right? You might have somebody on staff or somebody you'd bring on who is a good communicator, is able to package these things and really deliver them, that type of stuff. And, you know, looking at these, because you're asking about the answers to the questions, you know, oftentimes it's not necessarily that they have a direct answer of that kind, because maybe they haven't had a situation, maybe they were very fortunate in coming up in an organization that was dead focused on accountability and everyone did their thing and nobody ever got in trouble. But, you know, what you might be looking for are adjacent, you know, behaviors of some, when they had to make a tough decision and why, you know, and those types of things. So I don't want to say there's a right or wrong answer to these, and I don't want to kind of bring us in that box. We ultimately might have different interpretations of what a good answer would be in that. But what we're looking for, I think, is evidence that they have the skills necessary to complete these tasks and to do these things. So I think that's maybe, I know you weren't trying to box down on a correct, you know, this is what we want.
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same
yeah.
page in our understanding, so that later
Right.
on we don't come back and say, that's not the way I saw this. So that
Right.
we have these
Right.
discussions now, you know, and that we're kind of all on the same page. You know, and that one to me was those, and I don't want to get into the weeds on these because we
Right.
should be a little broad.
Can
But,
I weigh in on this a little
yes,
bit?
Yes,
Dr.
please.
Picard?
So part of this is not just in what you're looking for in answers to questions that you pose to candidates, but also in reference checks. Because you'll find people who may have a reputation among their peers or people who have worked with them of holding everybody accountable, and yet that person doesn't believe that's necessarily what they're doing. They're just doing their job as they see it. So they might not answer a question. Do you hold people accountable? Well, yeah, we all do what we're supposed to do. But when you talk in reference checks, you find out, is this person some who holds people accountable, who doesn't allow for just shifting people around to avoid those difficult discussions that have to take place. And then somebody says, oh yeah, all the time, we knew that we weren't going to get away with that. But that's not necessarily something that the candidate would say to you. Some candidates might not say that to you. So think of these also in terms of the reference checks that come in and what people say about these candidates, not just what they themselves say.
And I fully agree. That was my entire
Yeah.
point about this in the first place, is that generally the search committee comes up with these specific points because that's what leads their questions on the reference checks, and then later on down the road their own communications. And that's why I was saying, you know, these might be a little loquacious or verbose to me, but if they're happy with it because that's how they're able to do the reference checks, then I'm fine with that.
Somewhat ironic that, educators are known to be verbose, but you might say the same thing about your profession.
Yes, absolutely. Until the judge gives you a page limit.
far as defining these and moving forward, personally, I think the culture of accountability is a little more broad, if that's our attempt at keeping things a little broad. I don't have a problem with either. It's the accountability in general. That is my concern, to make sure that we have someone that is willing to take accountability. Any other way in before we move forward?
I'm wondering, and this is a question I guess to ask him, if the reason it said it, because what changed was to all stakeholders of schools and communities. I'm wondering if that became broader because of going out to the community forums. It was heard from the community as well, and our other stakeholders, not just within the staffs and the organization. So it just dawned on me, that may be why it's a little broader that way too.
And that, yeah, that's
I do
fine.
like the all
Yeah.
stakeholders.
Oh,
I mean,
totally.
You know, absolutely.
I can go either way on the culture when I just want to really have a good feel and understanding of
So-
what their definition of
If
accountability
we
is.
changed it to a
Demonstrate it.
culture of accountability to regarding all stakeholders of the schools and community, and we kind of put the two together, do we think that that,
Yeah. I think that's good.
is that possible? Okay, so essentially, we're just changing it from a record of accountability to all stakeholders of the schools and community to a culture of accountability to all stakeholders of the schools and community.
Record of a culture?
A record of
demonstrate
culture,
or-
Or
yeah.
a record and
Whatever.
a
Well,
that's,
culture.
to
Whatever is
demonstrate is in
best.
the top line.
Yeah,
If it's
demonstrate.
successful, demonstrate,
Oh, okay.
boom. Yeah.
Thank you.
Record
I
of
think you should.
creating,
A record of a culture of accountability.
yeah,
Do we have that?
yeah.
I think we have that down. I'm not going to repeat it, but
Yeah.
that's, all right. Then, no more questions or comments?
Nope.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the selection criteria for the new superintendent as amended?
So moved.
Board Member Kravitz moves all, do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Perleberg, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. We move now to our action item B, the second read of policy JFB, open enrollment. Dr. Creekard?
Yes, after a very extensive process, I believe, that involved principals, stakeholders, through parent council and through individual school parent leadership, and a number of meetings among the staff, and certainly meetings with you as well to go through. We are here to bring forth our recommendations for revisions to the open enrollment policy, JFB. Dr. Guerin, who has led this charge for us with the able assistance of our General Counsel, Michelle Marshall.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that, Dr. Creekard. You'll recall that we had a proposed revision to this policy at our October 1st meeting. And since that time, we have had additional conversations with parents as well as individual board members. And we've come back with a few additional suggested changes with the possibility of approval tonight. We'll go through what changes we have on the policy, which is what you would be approving tonight. And then for information for you all, as well as our audience, we'll go through the proposed changes to the regulation. And feel free to interrupt with questions or discussion, or we can have that at the end. It's your preference. So what we have up here on the screen is policy JFP open enrollment. The first change you'll see here in light blue is with the assistance of our leaders at our schools of choice. Those are our schools that don't have attendance boundaries. We added a definition of what is a school of choice so that our families who are looking at open enrollment have an understanding that there's this other animal out there called a school of choice. So that definition says it means a school within district boundaries. It doesn't have a designated attendance area, enrolls all eligible students who meet the timely application process unless they don't have capacity. In addition, discussions with you all as well as parents led us to add a definition of what is excess capacity. This is a most recent change that we just sent to you this morning, so I'll pause on that if you want to discuss it, but what it says is that excess capacity means the number of new open enrolled students the district can accommodate after accounting for the actual and expected enrollment of students who reside in the school's boundaries and or who are attending the feeder schools. And thank you also to Dr. Sackos for her assistance with that definition. I'll go ahead and move. Go ahead.
Is that the number of new open enrolled students the district can accommodate after accounting? Ignore me.
Okay, we can certainly come back to it. Like I said, it's the most recent change we made, so you guys may have, need to think about it a minute. Okay, so nothing changed there under enrollment options. As we discussed in the previous public meeting, we added superintendent's designee after superintendent where it appears in the policy. It is not usually the superintendent, him or herself, doing each of these items. Let's see. We have in there as. Sorry? Did I insult you? I'm sorry. I apologize. Superintendent works very hard. And so do his designees. So these are changes you saw before where we have the report of excess capacity by December 1 each year. And here under enrollment priorities, again with discussion among, maybe you would like to talk about this. You really worked more directly on that one.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Guerin.
So there was priority language using really technical language. And so if someone was reading it, they may have to go to the definition section to have an understanding of it. So we tried to use simplified language, but keep the technical language in parentheses. And we showed this to several stakeholders, and they found it to be much more clear and easy to understand. So this was based on your feedback from the last board meeting. So this new language, when someone reads it and then you pass it to another person and you pass it to another person, they all came to the same conclusion without having to define resident, non-resident, all those things.
This language here is in blue, but we did discuss it last time that every attempt will be made to keep families together. We added a section specific to enrollment priorities for schools of choice to allow them a little bit more flexibility with their realities. So this language says that for schools of choice, if capacity is not sufficient to enroll all students who submit timely applications, the school of choice shall select students through an equitable selection process approved in advance by the superintendent or his or her designee, and then as an example, that might be a lottery. The next section we renamed at your suggestion. The ASBA policy called it admission standards, which is a confusing reference because it's really about whether a student's been expelled. And so we changed that section to be titled expulsion. Under transportation, we moved some things around to delete repetition and make it clear that when we're talking about transportation of open enrolled students, we're talking about capacity on the bus, not the capacity discussed earlier in the policy as to schools or programs. So that's green because it was the exact same language but moved up. And then we added, subject to the foregoing, families need to get their students who are open enrolled to an existing bus stop. We also, as discussed last time in the public meeting, deleted the Rio Verde reference there at the end, which is in purple now. Track changes is fun with all those colors. let's see. So under exception, we have this language that has been in the policy for quite some time and is ASBA. Let's see. We added a clarification at the end there in blue that this exception is still subject to the statutorily permitted consideration of whether a student has been expelled or is under expulsion from another educational institution. So that is it for the policy. Is there any discussion before we look at the regulation or questions?
Sorry, can you put that to the?
Sorry, where do you
Can
want?
put that to the exception?
Exceptions.
Yeah.
There we are.
Socially risk, which authorize additional enrollment of non-resident students up to the determined school grade on the basis order completed, I'm sorry, I'm just catching up, on the basis of the order to enrollment preference as long as the non-resident students have been expelled. Okay, and this probably isn't the place to have this discussion. May not even be the place to put this. I just think I'd be remiss in not stating concerns that have been raised in the past, especially by our high schools, that at some point, the consideration of programs available at the school that someone is, a non-resident is trying to open enroll at, can also be a factor, especially if you're looking at the school year's already started, staffing has already happened, you're halfway through. And, the questions have been raised if, okay, sure, we have open space here, but this open seat might not be the actual best for this student and where this student is currently academically. Again, I don't know if this is the right place to have that conversation or any language about that, but I don't want us to ignore it.
I think what we've learned through this process is the open enrollment policy in isolation is not going to meet that specific need. So the excess capacity work that's been done is critical, leading to the open enrollment policy, and that has to be worked very tightly with human resources and staffing and communication with the building principal. So I think through this whole process, we've learned that that all needs to tighten up to work together to get to what you're saying, that
Right.
nuanced individual site need.
And I guess that's my question, and I should have brought it up earlier, I apologize, but for especially our high school or maybe middle school principals, will they have the language here that they need to make sure that the student can be successful where they're trying to enroll? Maybe it's another high school, of one of our other high schools, Ken, I mean, I've heard a lot of different scenarios, so I'm just kind of wanting to raise that question.
It's a bit of a fine line that we have to be very careful not to cross.
Oh, yes, I understand.
So
those
you're not looking at a
delicacies.
student's record and saying, well, you are in automotive shop, Russian, and biogenetics, and we don't have any of those classes. That's one thing. So why are you coming here and at the semester or at the 9 weeks and going into classes where you would have missed? You won't get credit for these. That's one. The other is to say, you haven't done very well in English. Maybe you should go to a school with more Spanish-speaking kids.
No.
Yeah, I
That's
know you're not
obviously
saying,
not.
I know you're not saying that, and I wouldn't
Right.
accuse our principals of that, but I would be
Right.
careful to put something in language that might allow an interpretation that we don't
Right.
intend it to.
And that's the tricky part, is speaking with our principals who know that's not their goal, is just keep kids out they don't like. It is a frustration of, wherever that student may be in their school, the records, that midway through the year, they may simply not have the right program that could help them be successful. And that's been raised. And so I just, again, I'm not trying to throw a big wrench in anything. I just feel like this might be the place to shine a little light on that question mark and make sure our principals have what they need.
I think that and we get to the regulations, and they talk about a behavior contract, an attendance contract, be an academic contract, so that you say, I'm not so sure that this is the right fit for you academically because of your record, and we will offer support, because that's what we do in public education. We'll offer support and help, but they get to a point where they become disruptive to the education of the school or the classroom because of it, then they're put on a process so that we can show complete fairness and due process before someone at that point is revoked. There can be some counseling at the beginning, and there should be, to look at the record, and so this has been a problem. You get a fresh start, good luck, we're behind you if you need us, but I think that would be more in the regulations area.
And I'll
Thank
just
you
say
for that clarification.
two things about that. One, the capacity determination is supposed to do most of that work up front. So X school is now closed, or X program is now closed when you come to the door after the staffing has been done, ideally. We know that's not always the case, but ideally. And then specific to administrative transfers, which is in the regulation that we'll show you, we did several years back work with high school principals where they said, can we say no more after March 1 unless the superintendent says it's okay? So that was one way of trying to get at that problem. It's not
Yeah.
perfect, but it is.
I do vaguely
Yeah.
recall
And we'll pull
those
that up.
conversations. No, but no, that's reassuring, and like I said, I just wanted to shine a little light on that. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll pull up the regulation. Nothing new here at the beginning. Okay. So we had a lot of discussion, I'm sorry, did you want to talk about
No,
this one?
go.
Okay. We had a lot of discussion about families getting their documents together and getting them in and having a list of what is needed. And so in having those discussions, we added the list you see there in blue, looking at the statute, applicable statutes, and speaking with CIMAR. And this list is actually also currently on our website under, I think it's under the FAQs for open enrollment. So you'll see this has birth certificate pursuant to the statute, current immunization, proof of residency pursuant to ADE and statute, parents' ID, withdrawal form if applicable, and then any custody documentation. We did have discussion with all principals on conference calls before we brought this to you the first time regarding the 10 school days time for families to get that information in. And we have also had discussions with staff and parents and board members regarding the fact that we can't require additional documents as a condition of enrollment, although we definitely have had those discussions about, how are we tracking down transcripts and things like that at the high school level and supporting our registrars and getting kids scheduled at the high school level. Is there anything else you would say about that?
No, just that we really sought a lot of input on this to make sure that we could make it workable and also follow statutory language. Yes.
So I would be remiss, because I've heard this from several of our parents, and so they would like to hear an explanation as to why we cannot require this information at the time of application, and that you are requesting that it be 10 days after.
We, as I said, we can't require documentation as a condition of enrollment specific to the birth certificate or what the statute calls other reliable proof of age and identity. There is a timeline within which a family can get that to us. I think it's 30 days. I'd have to look for specifics, but that statute that's cited there gives a family time. So we can't say, hold on, we can't enroll you till you get that to us. That's set forth in the statute. Under immunization, for an example, a family can say they have a religious exception and not provide us with immunization records.
But in that, they have to give you written
Yes.
information on that, so.
But they don't have to give us a lot of information. They just have to say they have it, a religious exemption, and sign it. We can't be asking them if it's a valid
written form to
religious.
put in the file, because
Yeah.
it's state
Right.
state statute and regulation
Yep.
that we must have a proof of immunization from every child,
Or the waiver.
or the waiver.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to note that site administration, they talked to their office staff and they thought this was reasonable and helped them get to where they needed to be.
Proof of residency, as I told you at our last public meeting, the ADE keeps a list current for each year of what is acceptable for documentation for proof of residency. So we specifically reference that. That's also, it's set forth in statute that ADE shall do that. And then there's special exceptions for those who are doubled up or shared residency or homeless or McKinney-Vento. And so we have to make sure that we're not, that we're complying with those rules. Those are both state and federal rules. Parent ID, that just happens at the time of enrollment normally. A withdrawal form, sometimes we, in our getting documents from another school, get that form from that other school. Registrars are doing that pretty regularly. And then, of course, custody and guardianship documentation. That's not a perfect system. Sometimes one parent gives us something and then later another parent comes along and says, hey, here's this later court document. That's just one of those conversations that we have. So we might not know that information right away. Okay.
We moved pre-K student language and administrative transfer down in the policy because those were separate issues. And then we moved into administrative transfer language.
So that's where I mentioned we have that March 1, after which time an administrative transfer can't happen without superintendent's approval. I think you all are pretty familiar that when a student wants to move from one SUSD school to another, the two principals are supposed to have a conversation and both say, yes, this is a good thing, we'll accept, and this is a good thing, they're not escaping some consequence at the sending school.
And we don't want our open enrollment policy to prohibit those types of decisions in the best interest of students. And then the last is our guidelines for revocation of open enrollment. And this aligns with a form that principals use if needed. So if a student enrolls right away, if there's issues related to academics, discipline, or attendance, a plan can be put in place that requires parent communication and progress work toward that plan. So open enrollment can be revoked. There just has to be due process, a plan, parent communication, and an opportunity for the student to improve, because that's what we want.
And that's it.
Okay, Board Member Beckham.
I'll mention this because I took the opportunity to look at the guideline for the revocation. That's something I think that we may need to look at. If the parent is using that as a guideline, it's a very official document with a lot of language that is very difficult for a layperson to understand. And so if the parent is going to be using that, we might want to really review that and maybe change that document a little bit.
So we talked about that, and the document itself is really for the principal's use.
Okay.
The regulation is designed to give a family that's looking at that, here's what the general areas are that could be cause for revocation. But we also talked about adding a narrative to the website under open enrollment for families that find themselves in that situation. You know, here's who you contact, the office that's in charge of that, and you know, maybe an FAQ type of thing so to help people understand that.
And we've mentioned before, we actually think on the website, it's very helpful right now with the frequently asked questions, but pending approval, we will go back and take this information and update it to make it as transparent and easy to understand as possible.
Board Member Greenberg.
So let me just ask a couple questions here. for my own amusement, I guess, but because there are parents who want to know, why can't we say that we will only accept open enrollment students with a 3.0 GPA or higher?
The state statute does not allow for enrollment to be based on that. And further, the concern legally is that that puts the district in a position of being accused of discriminatory practices in enrollment. And that's looking at state and federal standards.
Thank you. And why can't the district say, you live 100 miles away, you'll never be here on time, so we're not going to accept you? The same reason?
Yes, the same reason. There's no statutory basis to exclude students for that reason. Certainly, if they're having trouble, we've got procedures in place to help with that and address it, but yeah.
Yeah, the
Right.
statute requires they live in the state of Arizona.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right, and so that's my point, because, and the reason I asked is the same reason that the board vice president asked, is that we do have parents, and my answer to them is always because the state statute doesn't allow it. And I think the only answer is the state statute doesn't allow it, and I personally noted at the last special meeting that I don't think it's right to treat kids differently simply based on where they're born. We have a state law, open enrollment, and that's how it's got to be, and we treat all children equally regardless of where they come from. So I think that's important to note just on the record. I also think, I appreciate all this work that's gone into this from everybody, from board members who've been working with you guys. I know I have not been, but I appreciate the board members that have been, and parents who've put a lot of time into this, and students, other faculty, staff, everybody doing this. I think the context is important, right? I mean, my understanding is the impetus for this 15th revision to this policy was the Arcadia issue, I think. Is that correct? That, I mean, what really kind of drove this was the over-enrollment there. And, you know, all these policies in place, it's important that we clarify it and make it clear for people who are applying, you know, how are they going to, you know, what could happen if it's going to be revoked? How do we apply for it in the first place? I think ultimately at the end of the day, though, because there are people who still review this and go, oh, but what about this, what about this? I think it's important to note that, frankly, you know, the Arcadia issue happened. It was a mistake. We messed up. And it won't happen again because we're focused on this issue. We're going to work on it. We've got staff and admin on it. It's just an unfortunate blip. And, you know, I don't think these because it could still happen, right? I mean, we could still make an administrative error, whatever happens, we could end up with an over-enrollment situation by accident, or, you know, so we hope that doesn't ever happen, and it won't ever happen.
Not in my tenure.
Again, but, you know, the point is, it's almost kind of two separate issues, I think. That's the way it's come to me, because it's come to me as, well, we have these additional students here, why didn't we do this, why didn't we do that? And it's because the state law doesn't allow us to, and that isn't really why, you know, this might have happened in the first place. So I just wanted to say that, you know, it's nobody, you know, we're live and learn.
I think I would say also that we're constantly looking at policies. We're looking at policies to make sure that they reflect whatever changes have taken place in the law. We're looking at policies to sometimes reflect what is common practice and make it more sensible. And sometimes issues arise and we look at a policy and then we carry it further, as in this case, to say, okay, we may need to clarify a few of these definitions for parents, but as we looked at it more and more, with your help, we said, this needs a greater
Absolutely.
overhaul.
Absolutely.
And so we take the opportunity to do something completely right, not just half right.
Right, absolutely.
I appreciate that, and I will say that we have certainly had those conversations with concerned parents that this policy isn't the answer to everything that all the concerns that were raised. This is the open enrollment policy, and, you know, we keep finding ways to improve it, which is great, but it's not the answer to everything. We have a lot of other factors that went into some of those concerns. And I will also say that many of you joined us at the Teen Town Hall on Saturday, and we heard a student say, I'm worried about my sibling not being able to come
Yeah.
to school. And that's heartbreaking.
Yes.
That is not the intention of this, and won't be the effect of this. So I just wanted to say that publicly.
Thanks for that, Michelle. And, it's obvious, this is going to need to be revised again. Education and circumstances around things are always changing, and we're always evolving to try and keep up with this. And our community's voice tends to drive that change, and I would like to think we welcome it, on a continual. And to your point, without getting on like a soapbox here, we never know why. We've got a great district and we've got great schools, and many people want to be in our schools, and many students want to be. We never know the circumstances why a student is coming. Maybe they're coming from another district because they weren't given opportunities that their family sees exist here. So maybe their academics aren't where they should be just because where they're coming from, not because of them. So I think it's fantastic that we're reviewing this, and whatever circumstances have led us to look at it right now. I certainly think we welcome it and we're better for it. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would certainly say after that Teen Town Hall is a very good reminder that diversity is what makes us great, not a problem.
Any other questions or comments from board members? No? Okay. Then do I have a motion to approve our second read of policy JFB open enrollment?
Wasn't there another section? No?
Yeah, there is. There's still more.
Isn't there more presentation?
Sorry?
No.
No, we're done.
Oh, okay,
No,
sorry.
we didn't go through it all.
This is the
That was the
regulation.
Okay.
And we did the policy first.
The policy
And the
first.
regulation.
No, but you didn't finish the regulation. There's still more.
There is.
We did the administrative transfers and the guidelines for
The
revocation.
guidelines for revocation.
That's the final part.
That was it.
And then you changed the 3 at the very end. Did we talk about those?
Did we not?
Just, we touched
Oh,
base briefly.
it changed, okay,
Right.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So any other questions?
Just checking.
I will say one thing, actually. Because I have maybe a little bit different perspective, because it was brought up that maybe some people felt that at Arcadia, when people were asking to close enrollment, it might have been because of those individual students in open enrollment. And I have to say that every stakeholder that I spoke to about it that was saying, what about closing open enrollment, was not due to the actual individual student, or that they might be a minority, or that they might live farther away from the school. It was the fact that the school was not prepared for the amount of
was a staffing
students.
issue.
It had nothing to do with the individuals that were coming to the school. It only had to do with the actual number of students. And I think that, since you just pointed it out, was a misconception by some people in the community. And so I just want to say on behalf of the stakeholders I spoke with, this to clarify that misinterpretation.
I think there was, the staffing was a
The
big piece of that
Okay.
puzzle.
Right.
That issue.
Thank you.
And
Anything else?
Thank you.
I would just say thank you for emphasizing that. These, for years, have been difficult conversations. And sometimes, because they can go to a certain place if you let them, or if you decide, oh, that's what they're meaning, I think in many ways, we haven't been able to address the very real issues of our schools. And I've had lots of conversations about revocation of open enrollment, and it's not even really so much about keeping kids out, or keeping that kid out, or that kid, skin color, or anything. It's about making sure every student on that campus is successful, and including that open enrollment student. And so these conversations can go so many different ways, and I just appreciate you emphasizing that. I agree. I think the Arcadia conversation isn't so specifically about skin color or anything like that. It's about making sure the students that come there are successful, every single one of them, so,
And we
thank
have
you.
the resources that you say.
And we have the
that
resources to take care of
Right.
them. So,
Textbooks.
yeah, I
Teachers.
appreciate that, thank you.
I agree, and I think we're all in agreement, that we welcome them. Okay, do I have a motion then to Approve the second read of policy JFB open enrollment.
So moved.
Board Member Kravitz makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Okay, I move to adjourn our special meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. The meeting is adjourned at 6:19 PM.